Welcome, everybody, to The Chart, where we are talking about all things personal finance. Today, we are talking about an emergency fund. But with me, as always, I want to introduce my co-host, my guest, whatever you are, Jeff. I want to introduce you. This is Jeff Myers.
Hey John, how's it going?
It's going good. We got to figure out what your title is officially. We can
I
go
like
co-host.
co-host.
Co-host works, but
Yeah.
all right, we'll see. Anyway, so today we're talking about emergency funds. Let's just start off with the basics. What's an emergency fund?
Yeah. An emergency fund should be the first place that you start when you get into the realm of savings, retirement, debt payoff, any of that stuff, really. The first place you should look to is building up an emergency fund. And that can be, opening a savings account, starting to put money in that. Some people might be in the situation where they've never saved before, or they keep it all in their checking account. But this is really trying to separate your main bucket of money into a separate savings emergency fund bucket.
So this is if you've never saved, this is the priority then? Like if you're starting from zero, this is the first thing you're saving for?
Yeah, absolutely. It's always been my recommendation to start with an emergency fund.
Okay. And let's just talk about how big should, or we won't get to size yet. We'll talk about like why is it important to have an emergency fund?
Yeah, so emergency fund really it's in the name, right? So you think about if you're in an emergency situation and you needed money, you would hopefully have a place to draw that from. So your car breaks down, you get into a terrible accident, you have to buy a new car, you lose your job, something like that happens where you don't have a steady stream of income, or you don't have, or you need to use a large expense for something, large amount of money to pay for something. The emergency fund would cover you in that situation.
Okay, great. So let's kind of go. Let's go into size an emergency fund. With it, from what I've heard, apparently the worst. You want 6 months income is what I heard, because apparently the worst emergency is losing your job. Is that the right amount, or where are we starting with?
That's close, but probably in the wrong direction. So the way that we always think about it is, in my profession, is 3 to 6 months of expenses.
Of expenses?
Right. So if you were to lose your job, you want to have enough money set aside to be able to fund yourself until you start the next job.
Okay.
So if you have 3 to 6 months of expenses saved up, then you can make those big payments, your mortgage payments, your utilities payments and stuff, while also looking for a job and being able to support yourself and your family.
So it seems like the goal is like we'll have enough savings to get by for 6 months, for three to
Yeah,
six months.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's not like, hey, I'm still going out to eat every 3 nights, or I'm doing all this extra stuff. Pre-COVID, I'm going out to the movies all the time. You're kind of paring down your expenses a lot. So if you look at just throwing out kind of basic numbers, if you're spending $1,000 a month right now, you might think, okay, in worst case scenario, what can I cut out? Drop it down maybe to $700, $800 a month, and then 6 months of that would get you by in worst case scenario.
Right. And it seems like it's kind of a play it out by ear on like what you would personally need for your expenses, right? Like is there a formula you've got that's like real good, or is it just you got to kind of do the math for yourself and figure out what works?
Yeah, it's different for every person, because some people spend a lot of money on going out to eat, and that's going to be harder for them to pare down than someone who doesn't spend any money on going out to eat and likes to spend a lot of money on, I don't know, clothes. So every person's in kind of a different situation where they're going to have kind of levers that they can pull, where they can kind of pare down their spending to survive in that type of situation. Um, I mean, you can of course still go all out and cover all of your expenses for 6 months and have a very large cash buffer in that situation. It just means it'll kind of slow down your future savings because you've got to build up this fund at the beginning.
Okay. And I just want to, I think to be clear, we want to say an emergency fund isn't for things like a medical emergency. For that, you would theoretically have insurance, right? Like, and I
Yes.
think that we'll do a future episode on that. But this is a more of an income emergency, is kind of the way to think about it, right?
Yeah, I think that's kind of the base way of thinking about it. Is this is a fund for, something happens to you or your spouse where your income is impaired and you need to have funds to access that. it of course can be used for, a medical emergency or something like that, but ideally you would have other sources to cover that, like you said, insurance, HSA, FSA cards, that type of thing.
Gotcha. So let's talk about our boy Dave Ramsey. He's a big fan of the emergency fund, but he always talks about like $1,000.
Yeah, right.
Why you say 3 to 6 months of expenses? What's his $1,000 emergency fund? It seems like they're probably used for different things. Like what's the difference there?
Yeah, so remember we talked about this last time with Dave Ramsey. He's taking people from negative to zero. And usually most of those people that are in the realm of negative have never saved money in their life. They've only used the money in their checking account. They keep everything in one place, or the money
Right.
on their credit cards, that type of thing. Having this goal of $1,000 emergency fund as the first baby step for Dave Ramsey really helps people have an attainable small goal that they
Okay.
can focus on and really start flexing and working on that savings muscle that you need to be able to pay off debt, because you'll get into a situation where instead of looking at maybe $50,000 of credit card debt, you are actually saying, okay, instead of worrying about that monster, all I'm worrying about right now is saving $1,000. So what do I need
Right.
to do to get that in 3 months, 5 months, 6 months, whatever that looks like? Now I've broken that up into small chunks, and you can start, automatically transferring that from one account to a savings account, and kind of covering yourself in that front. So really getting people started rolling down the hill towards paying off debt. I think
Sure.
that's a good way to think about that $1,000 fund.
Okay. And then what? So we know we want to get the emergency fund. We know that $1,000 might be like a good first benchmark before
Yeah.
you build out and go to that 3 to 6 month. What are strategies for this? Like how how do you save money? I know that's a
Yeah.
broad question, but like generally speaking, if you've never done it before, what are some basic tools or some things you can kind of get set up to kind of get that fund built out?
Yeah. So first thing, we probably should have said this earlier, but to be clear, an emergency fund is not like an investment vehicle. You hear the
Mhm.
term mutual funds or something like that. This is really just your own personal fund. So you're building up a fund to support yourself in the future. I think the key with that, and the very first step that you need to take, is opening a savings account, and really like separating things out so you have more than just a checking account, if that's your situation. And
Mhm.
um, I think the next step on that front is, the best way to do that is automate it.
Yeah.
So you'll hear this a lot from a lot of kind of personal finance gurus, is pay yourself first. So you can set up automatic savings. You could work with your employer, when they do a direct deposit to your bank account for your monthly paycheck. You can have them allocate a certain portion that goes directly to your savings account.
Mhm.
Then you don't even see that savings happen. That's a really easy way to get it set up. You can also have it set up so that once the funds hit your bank account, your bank has an automatic transaction set up to where it goes directly to your savings account. Um, I think one of the best ways to handle an emergency fund, to truly keep it separate, so that you're not accidentally or inadvertently looking at it a lot, or
Mhm.
pulling from it when you kind of maybe want some extra money for something that's not really an emergency, is to open a bank account, a savings account at another bank.
Wow.
So let's say you do all your banking with Bank of America. You know everything about Bank of America. You love it. You're great. But you look at your accounts regularly, right?
Mhm.
You'll be able to see your balances all the time. Let's say you open an account with US Bank or JP Morgan Chase, something like that, and that's only your savings account. You've got automatic transactions happening between those. You're not used to checking that. So behaviorally, mentally, you can separate your daily finances, your daily accounts from that emergency fund, so that you can kind of train yourself not to look at that, not to think of that as, hey, I can pull from this if I
Mhm.
want to go buy this
Right.
nice little car, or buy something for my backyard, or this grill or something like that. You're not looking at it that way. It's truly separate, both in your mind and at a different institution. And then you can really kind of build that up without drawing on it.
Wow. I never really thought of that, but that's actually a really good idea. Uh, Both of mine are in the
Thank you.
same bank. It's good. Yeah, well done. Yeah, this is why you're the co-host.
Making my way up to host.
You're getting there. You're getting there. Soon you won't need me. So let's. What's priority with this? Should people be like cutting down their spending like crazy and just putting all their time and effort into building this emergency fund? Like, what's priority? Or should people like it's got the name emergency fund, so it does seem
Right.
scary, but like general rule of thumb, how much effort should people put into this? Because I don't want people like, well, I need an emergency fund. I'm eating nothing but rice for the next 6
Yeah.
weeks while I get this fund built up, and then I can go back to living. Like,
Right.
what's a good kind of pace for this, do you think?
Yeah, I think so. This is definitely classified differently than, paying down debt or
Mhm.
something that might require you to go into that rice and beans mode for a short period of time.
Sure.
Emergency fund, well, we talked about Dave Ramsey's like negative to zero. When
Mhm.
we take the steps from 0 to 1, 0 to 10, your first step should be building that emergency fund.
Okay.
So it doesn't mean that you need to cut out everything in your life, go down to the bare minimum, but it does mean that instead of investing maybe in the stock market or buying cryptocurrency or pursuing real estate or something like that, your first step should be building this emergency fund, because this needs to cover you in case anything happens. If you go out and you just playing in the stock market all the time and something happens, you lose your job, you might have that money, you might not. It's in a lot more of a risky situation. So you're not really creating that backstop for yourself, because
Right.
you don't ever want to go from 0 to 10 and
Right.
then fall back down to negative 10 again
Right.
because something happens. You would rather go 0 to 10 and then fall back to 2 or 3 because you've built up this emergency fund and kind of prepared for this situation. So it's definitely top priority, but it should not be a lifestyle change priority where you kind of give up everything else. You find a way to build it in, maybe cut out some things like Netflix, Chick-fil-A every week,
Right.
$50 into your savings account every week until you can kind of get it up to where it needs to be.
It sounds like the emergency account's kind of a good way to practice savings, it seems like, or to kind of get good at savings, and
Yep.
you can kind of learn, well, this is what it feels like to have $100 withdrawn from my account and going into savings every week or every 2 weeks. And then
Yep.
as you adjust that new life, you can kind of alter it a little bit and figure out what works for you. So it seems like even though it is an emergency fund, there's not necessarily an emergency for you to get it funded.
Right.
to-
Exactly. Exactly. That was impressive.
See, that's why I'm the host. right.
Someday I'll learn these.
Someday. All right. And then so let's just wrap up with talking about, like, now you've got the emergency fund funded.
Mhm.
Can you tap into it for other things that are not emergencies? Like, what, it is a nice chunk of change you've got there. Like, what should be the rules you set up for yourself with once you have an emergency fund?
Yeah, so I think part of separating it physically into a separate bank will help you not feel like you can access that quickly and easily,
Right.
because that's kind of how it should be. It really shouldn't be used for anything other than a true emergency, unless you are committed to replenishing that fund.
Mhm.
So if it's at $10,000 and you need 2,000 for something, you got to buy a new car or something like that, or you're in some sort of situation that's not quite an emergency, or you're not really sure if it's an emergency, you need to pull money from it. It's your money. You shouldn't
Right.
feel bad about doing it. It's not like swiping a credit card, right?
Right.
This is your own money you set aside, but you should commit to replenishing that so that it's always at least that 3 to 6 month range. And then ideally, as your income grows, as your expenses grow, that number will grow with it as well.
Okay. That makes sense. Cool. So I think we've kind of covered everything that is involved with emergency funds, or at least gotten everybody a good introduction. Jeff, are we missing anything, or do you think we've talked about what we need to talk about?
I think that pretty much covers it. Just the key is remembering that it's not necessarily an investment vehicle. It's not someplace where you're kind of looking to make a return. This is really just your own personal insurance emergency fund to cover you in case of something bad happening.
Awesome. Well, Jeff, I want to thank you for walking through an emergency fund is. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. As usual, I saved it for the end when I should have done it at the beginning. You know, Jeff's coming for my hosting spots. I need to get better at that. Anyways, thank you everybody for watching.